Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the, well, not the penultimate, but the first of the last three sessions of the Festival of Media Global 2018. Welcome to the Future Room. I'm quite excited. This is the first time I've been in here. I was marooned in the content room yesterday, so it's quite nice to be in here. Unfortunately, I made us overrun in the last room, and as a result, they refused to give me a seat. So I am going to stand. I'll try not to stand over them, but I will stand next to our panel. So you have come to the right session if you want to hear about out of home and what is happening in the out of home space and where it's going in terms of new technology, in terms of the digital space. You are in the correct place. So to help us kind of go through this conversation, we have a panel of experts. We will start at the end. So we've got Sven Smet, who is the Head of Brand Consumer Journey and Communications for Volvo. You can chat, you can clap, it's okay. We've got Cadi Jones, who is the Commercial Innovation Director at Clear Channel. We've got Theodorou, who is the GM for EMEA for Groundtruth. Yes. And then finally, but not least, it's Maher from JCDecaux. And what is your new title is? Sales and promotions, I like it. No. So, but we've been on a few panels before, so it's all very exciting to be here. So, I've always been a huge fan of out of home. Back in the days when I was editing Media Week, I was always a big advocate of out of home and how it works and how it was working within the sector. So it's quite exciting, and I'm happy to be doing this panel, which is very good. But I thought from a few questions to set the scene and set out where we are, I suppose measurement and ROI. We've talked a lot on a lot of the sessions over the last 2 days in these rooms, on the main stage particularly, and one of the things that Simon Pill from Adidas was talking about, in fact, was accountability and how he has vanity KPIs and then he's got real business KPIs. So from a measurement perspective, how does out of home deal in the digital space with measurement? Who would like to kick that off?
I'll have a stab from my perspective. So Groundtruth is a location marketing platform, mobile-based, and essentially we work with a lot of out-of-home partners in extending basically where there's out-of-home placements onto mobile. So that's actually connecting the real world with the digital world. So from our perspective, that gives us the ability to not only extend that message, but then start understanding some of the data points that sit from that space, where users go, how they overlap with other brands, where they might be coming from, which then can feed back into kind of a planning cycle, not just for out of home, but for other media as well. So that's something that we're working with in terms of sort of taking that connection and then trying to provide some form of kind of digital output, if you will. I'm not saying it's the be-all and the end-all, and we should be just focusing just on that, but that's definitely something that we're seeing an increased kind of demand for, and also the insights that sit around that as well. So it's again, a lot of this is down to what you don't know in terms of human behaviour in the real world, and if you can add some connection there, then I think that adds value.
Sorry, you were reaching. Okay, I'll go first. So from my perspective, I think it's important that we first look at the function that each of our media channels is performing, and that we don't look at them just in isolation. We need to ensure, and I think up to sort of even very recently, out of home has been a little bit siloed because we haven't had the same data benefits which a digital world bring to us, and that involves having timestamp data, knowing when things are playing out, contributing to data management platforms so that you can utilize mobile technologies and see who an exposed audience was, so you can bring continuity of message, control of frequency. And I think these are really big things that we can start to address in the digital world. I think still knowing where it sits in the funnel and having the right evaluation sort of metrics for it, we're still a top of funnel function. We're still providing brand fame. We're still providing mass awareness to an audience. We can just be a lot more intelligent about how we do it these days. So I think that for me is a real key thing. If you bring everything down to that last click attribution, we'll always fail because we don't have clicks. But if the client knows what they're trying to achieve, I think we can show some very, very promising results.
I think just to build on that, from my perspective, there's sort of almost like two types of media now in out of home. You've got big broadcast capabilities. You know, we really are the last broadcast medium standing. You know, with everything that's happened on, you know, across radio, digital audio, we've been hearing about this week, yesterday and today.
It feels like a week, trust me.
Like a week. Similarly with TV and, you know, the rise of time-shifted TV, VOD and so on. You've got, you know, out of home using a really classic broadcast, very upper funnel way. What digital out of home is kind of can be, if you want it to be, totally different to that. Right? You can use it in a very, very targeted way based on what's happening in that moment, in that context, who's nearby, any kind of information, any data that you have on what's going on in that particular location. And so I think you can kind of do two different things with it. It really is almost like two different media types. And I'm not advising we go into the dystopian Minority Report future, like the future's bright, the future's sort of black and a little chilly in this room. I think it's kind of making that distinction between, you know, I think Ben said it already, but that what is the client's objective and what do you want to do, and then using the medium in the way that's right for your objectives.
That's a good lead-in.
Yes. She's done this before.
I'm just very happy to sit on a panel of a classical medium for a while. I think I get very tired, although it's very important to talk about metrics and digital, while we have media that have been measurable all along for the top funnel. So as a car brand, Out of Home has always been delivering on romancing the product, getting awareness out, getting model opinion out very quickly. And that was always measurable. Of course, it is a challenge in today's consumer journey on how to connect it with other touch points, because we didn't have, at least until now, the right level of technology to integrate it. But it's a great always-on awareness medium that we use almost all over the world, and I think is highly linked to luxury categories, because it's about the product and the image. And for the love of God, there's an important job to do at the bottom of the funnel. But sometimes I get the feeling we stare ourselves blind at the bottom of the funnel, and we forget how to build awareness and opinion for our great products and services.
And from a brand perspective, taking that on, when you're looking at building your out-of-home campaigns, what is it you're looking for? What is it that you actually want from that? And how open are you as a brand to immersing yourself within the new technology that these guys can provide around out-of-home?
I give you a very specific example. A couple of months ago, we launched one of our latest products in Brazil. Now, Brazil is blessed with not having GDPR yet. So what I'm going to tell you is totally impossible in Europe, basically. And that is, you do an out-of-home campaign where you have content of people test driving your car live while they're test driving.
Right.
So it's an omni-channel idea where you get people into the dealership, you rig up a couple of cars, they test drive the car, their reaction goes immediately to a war room, you edit everything, you send it out on social media and on digital billboards at the same time. I think this is sort of like a tentpole experience, because what we wanted to show is how surprising it is to drive a Volvo, basically, instead of talking about the product, but do that with authentic reactions of people and put that on, on a fairly big scale out on the city. Great numbers, great lead generation, which we didn't expect and we didn't have a metric on, because again we were thinking about having reach and having frequency in the city. Fantastic campaign, super digital, integrated, omni-channel.
So Sven is like a dream client for all three of you, which is very exciting. But not everyone is as open-minded or as innovative as that. So what are the kind of biggest challenges you faced, or the industry or the sector faces within the industry, do you think?
I think really it's probably around getting brands to to feel that out of home is something they can use and using it to their full potential. So including motion, including information about the location where your ads are running, including data feeds and editing your ad based on the environment around it. All of this stuff is easily possible, and we're only just sort of touching the very beginning of it. So this sort of example that you're talking about, where you have almost live content, is very, very unusual. I'd like to see people making the most of the creative opportunities that we have, and I think that's, I'd like to see that much, much more.
Yeah, I think I agree with that 100%. I think what I would also add is that if you really look at what great brands do, they do great storytelling. And I think actually what you said resonated a little bit, which is that sometimes we can get buried into the metrics and we can sometimes forget the heart and soul of what a brand's trying to do. And actually I think it's not just about out of home, it's how that all works together. How do you tell a story across all the digital touch points with the real world touch points, and what can you learn from that? And I think the challenge is sometimes there's a lot of bad data out there. So how do you tell your stories, listen to the good data so that you can do something even better next time? And I think it's been a really hard thing to articulate, because there's a lot of dogs in the races that are all trying to build their own kind of silos and their own kind of channels, and they don't tend to work together so well. So I think we need better cross-collaboration, a consumer-centric approach to marketing in general that would incorporate great brand storytelling of out of home. But if you could extend that onto a device that then gives you extra metrics that could be real-time emotional metrics because you're in the vicinity on a mobile phone, then surely that's a good thing. And actually that challenge flips into an opportunity, but I honestly don't know if we're there yet.
We're getting some good answers about creative and digitization. I'm going to sort of take it the other way. One of the things I learned after 16 years of digital coming into out of home was an appreciation of classic out of home. Yes. Yeah, and the actual cover that can be sort of built through out of home. So I think one of the biggest challenges and threats we have are things like audit pools, where it has the most perverse economics, where large format out of home, the price is constantly driven down, yet the demand increases, and the universe comes under more pressure because these sites have to be maintained, landlords have to be paid. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges we will face, because not everywhere can justify full digitization, and the cover that we can give through classic out of home is extremely important. So if it continues to be driven into the ground by aggressive auditing and pitching, oh, we'll do it 10% cheaper. Well, not on my billboards you won't, because they won't exist. And that is a huge problem. We need to maintain the cover we have across all countries and all environments.
And how do we do that? What's the key? We mentioned collaboration. You did, Theo, earlier. Is that the key? The collaboration between not just the different firms within the out-of-home market, but across all the different sectors and areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult question to answer, because I'm talking from a specific viewpoint of mobile and out-of-home working together, and these guys are the kind of real experts on that point. But I think it's actually not specific to out-of-home. I just think there needs to be better collaboration, and I think if there is a consumer-centric approach, comms plan down, that can help ultimately justify the value of a lot of these touch points. I think that's where the value sometimes sits, rightly or wrongly. I mean, we can talk about, again, it's the same point, isn't it? It's if you focus on the metrics of each of these things, and digital is being considered a better ROI driver than something that's probably doing something equally well or even better. I suppose if you're a marketer, it's easier to sort of point to, well, that's driving ROI, that's a really hard thing, that needs to come down, that needs to go up in terms of pricing. So, I don't know, I think it's tough. I do think there needs to be better storytelling from the industry, not just from brands and the storytellers themselves on how that all works.
Yeah, I think agencies have a really important role to play here. I think again, also having a digital background, the difficult thing I used to run into at Yahoo was going in to see a 23-year-old comms planner. They'd be like, well, I don't use Yahoo.
Yeah.
But I'm like, well, 80% of the UK population do. I'm not selling Yahoo.
It's fine.
But it's the same thing with out of home. It needs, it's giving it that sense of the fact that what it can do as a medium, the power of out-of-home, the power of that public promise, making sure that everyone really understands that and how it fits together on a plan in that sort of omni-channel sense, or 360 sense of media, and not sort of siloing it off as a sort of thing that sits separately. It's on its own, or it's hard to plan. It's not.
Yes.
You can get such amazing reach and impact for your message across entire countries. Why wouldn't you put it on every single plan? So I think the idea I have is, it's not about, I'm not interested in taking share from him. I want to take share from everyone else. And I think that's the sort of thing when we start to get agencies planning in an omnichannel way, thinking about all of the media types and how they're really working together. I think that's when out of home stands proud, because it can, you can focus on what it really can achieve for a brand.
Yeah, just another perspective. I think for those of you who work with agencies, I think a lot of clients can be extremely lazy. They give you a couple of objectives and you figure out the media plan, right? While if you think back at out of home, before we were talking about geolocation, there was only one medium that was already geolocated, and that's out of home, because you can buy a particular location. And my point is that if you buy a central location, put up something that is top of the funnel. When you have something to say which is in the bottom of the funnel, buy another geolocation, right? So I've worked also in markets like China, where we were at a certain moment opening dealerships at the rate of 1 a week. And you just can't keep up digitally with that. And what's important is that the people in a certain area of Beijing or Shanghai know that there's a dealership. So it's a lot more effective to buy those locations through outdoor. And I think we have forgotten that outdoor is super geolocated. You just have to analyze what is my message and who are the people in this area, and then you can work with that. But don't plaster one message all over and go for the classical reach, because that's not necessarily your ROI as a client.
Yeah, and I think that is a big issue, isn't it? Is getting across the attractiveness of out-of-home. Some people forget what it can do and how it can work in different environments. And I think, Sven, you talked about almost bringing something to life, right? We got a session in here after around voice activation, and there was one yesterday around audio activation. The fact that you have the opportunity to bring something to life in real time, I think is something that often gets lost. And from an automotive perspective, I'm presuming that's the real attractiveness of having out-of-home in your campaigns.
Yeah, it is. Obviously, car people work at car manufacturers, right? We all gravitate to what we like. What's so interesting is that if you look beyond the actual romancing of the product and the interactivity or the storytelling from the values of your brand or the reaction from consumers, it makes it much more alive and much more interesting to do an omni-channel approach, because different connections can be made on different media.
And in terms of how we touched kind of, if you like, around collaboration, and Theo, obviously you're from the geolocation side of things, it's interesting to see, we're actually kind of putting the pieces in the right place and connecting out of home with the other media owners. Are we seeing more and more collaboration between out of home and more media owners? Rather, it used to be, 5-10 years ago, it was very much everyone was separate, didn't want to work together. Has that become a necessity, or is that something that has naturally evolved?
For us, it's naturally evolved. So it's actually a really big business for us in the US, this kind of collaboration with out of home and what we do. And we're seeing that in the UK, and it's coming from natural case studies that we had over there in terms of how the two mediums can work together. And you're absolutely right, the oldest location campaigns you ever see are actually, out of home sites and the shop signs over your shop, right? That's the very first location ads that have ever appeared, right? Yes. On the high street, drive me in. So I think you've got to build technology into that. I think that you don't do it for the sake of doing it. And if you look at the partnerships that we have globally and here in the UK with our out-of-home partners, together you are stronger, because you have something that not just differentiates the story and provides an innovation piece to it, but actually there is a valuable data set there that can help. As I said right at the beginning, it's a lot of it's about what you don't know, where else users go. And actually, if you can start tying things like, and not necessarily maybe for a car dealer, but obviously a lot of our partners are retailers, are QSR, quick service restaurants that are doing out of home. If you look at out of home for a QSR today, a lot of it is you're 5 miles away or 1 mile away from a restaurant. Well, if I can do that on the out of home site, and I can do that in a mobile experience that is actively driving you to that store, then you have a navigation device that's taking you there, that's tying up with what you're seeing in the real world. So that's a beautiful example of how those things work together. So it's just making sure that it's about KPIs, what you're trying to do. Yeah. You know, for McDonald's, it's a very different KPI to what you'd be trying to do with out of home.
So I think in terms from a collaboration point of view, data is the key. So if we're looking at working with mobile, it's very logical because we should be using the same data to plan the out-of-home as we're using to start with certainly the initial targeting for mobile. From an AV point of view, if you reduce the friction in terms of the kind of creatives that can run and how they can run, I've got, just in the UK, I've got 180 cinema screens in my mall environments. Now, the dwell time in a mall in the UK is 180 minutes on average. God help us all if we get stuck in the mall for 180 minutes. But it means that the audience are there for a hell of a long time. If they're going to the cinema and you can target me taking my daughter to see a Disney film, you can take the data from the cinema playout, because that can be bought programmatically, and put it straight into an out-of-home plan and know that you're going to marry up with that audience within a mall environment. You can then push our data into a mobile DMP and marry up geofencing to take the user from the out-of-home environment and probabilistically model them back to their home. So that's a massive reduction in friction. And again, it solves the problem of effectiveness and accountability, all performing different functions, all not necessarily running exactly the same copy. So that's going to be a challenge to the creatives to keep up with that and make sure we just don't get derivative format, but we get unique call to actions in different environments. But that's where we'll become far more collaborative. So I think it's a really exciting proposition.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of somewhere the frustration is, right? You touch on the whole fact that everyone has a mobile phone. It's the thing they look at most. It's the thing they take. But how else do you connect when you're in that outside world with out of home? So the question, I suppose, is how do we get the rest of the industry to get clients as excited and as using out of home as much as Sven does? How do we do that? What's the key to achieving that?
I had the pleasure of sharing the stage with Mark Ritson last year, which was massively intimidating, and I learned some new swear words. But he talks amazingly about how the digitisation of the out-of-home environment allows for greater flexibility and agility, performing new roles, but equally, when every other channel's fragmenting, mobile stays strong and out of home stays really strong. TV still struggles. It becomes AV. It becomes morphed into sort of an impression, whereas out of home stays strong. Even Les Burnett is there going, they have to go outside eventually. They can't just hide away. And that's going to get worse as we get through the generations and behaviours change. Maybe if we all put our devices down for a minute, like Theo suggested this morning, then we're the only game in town. And that's an even better scenario. But there's lots we can do and to get people excited. But I think showing them the capabilities and having people, big advocates like Les Burnett and Mark Ritson talking about it is really important.
Can I just add as well, I think the other thing to look at is that people fucking love out of home. Yeah. They really do. It's the one medium with the... Sorry, I'm just a bit...
Oh, it's good. It's the afternoon. It's day 2.
Yeah, you said Ritson. They love it. It's the medium with the most... the highest favourability rating. If you are stuck at a bus stop or on a tube or in a traffic jam, if I get the tube in the morning, I get on, I'm literally praying that there's something I can read for 20 minutes because it's literally illegal to make eye contact on the tube in London for anyone who's a non-British guest. And so that sentiment, that favourability, I think, is one other thing that really, really plays in our favour. Ads on every other medium are interruptive, right? If you're on a mobile device and you're in an app and an ad pops up and you've got to sit through that ad. If you're trying to watch content you actually want to get to and you're waiting to hit that skip ad button, people don't have that feeling about out of home. They really, really like it. So I think capturing some of that feelings that we all have as people and then taking them to work with us really, really helps. I think more people can do that and remember that way that out of home makes them feel, the better campaigns we see.
Yeah, and just very, very honestly and insightfully, when I went to China and my team presented me the first outdoor campaign, there was a QR code on a gigantic billboard. So my reaction as a Westerner was, who the hell puts a QR code on an out-of-home billboard, right? And the answer was, everybody. and I was really taken away by that because I didn't expect it. And then you look at the numbers, and hell yeah, people also scan the QR code and get to somewhere. And sometimes it's the mix of low-tech and high-tech that makes it happen. And so, you know, the bravery discussion of this morning, I think, is also important from a content point of view. Follow your customer, tell a story that is interesting, lead them through a maze of content, and just interact with them.
And I think that probably is the answer, isn't it? The storytelling, the content, connecting with that consumer, all the various different touch points that out-of-home does. And as we're in the future, it would be remiss of me not to ask a question around AI and kind of new technologies and how out-of-home is kind of partnering with those. Could we, get to a point where we're standing, I don't know, next to a bus shelter and I want to listen to, the first 4 pages of the sport in The Guardian and I can get someone to read it to me from the bus shelter? Are we moving towards that? How is out-of-home kind of working with those new technologies?
Technically, you could do it right now if you wanted to. Whether or not that's the right thing for your brand, or whether it's just crossing that creepiness line, is the question that I think brands have to ask themselves. Pretty much. I mean, the Minority Report is a dystopian. It's a horrible future. No one wants to live there. So I think it's figuring out where that line is and whether or not you want to be the person to cross it.
What Cadi said.
If we look at QR codes, we look at AR, they're all triggered from something, and that's a visual key. Now, every platform that we have, every surface that we have can become that visual key, and digital screens have the chance to do that in a far more dynamic way, so they can become the platform, the launch platform for everything. For JCDecaux in China, because the Chinese example is a great example, we reach 37 million people daily on the underground across various cities. That's a macro, that's a population. We reach a population every day, and that's ridiculous. But their behaviors are completely unique. They live and pay with Alipay. They live and actually purchase within WeChat. So e-commerce has become one of our biggest sectors by far in the underground. Now, if you speak to anyone in the Western world about e-commerce and out-of-home, they laugh because they think it's funny. But in the future, you're not going to laugh because you'll want your visual key everywhere. You'll want your brand there. You want them to shop because people are becoming less patient about waiting for goods. This could be a massive challenge for retail because they will shop every single environment they're in. And that's where I think, this progression and the joining up is going to become even more important because we'll become integral to not disrupting an experience, but enhancing an experience.
Okay, thank you guys. I feel like we've been asking a lot of questions here. Does the audience have a question? Is that first one back from lunch? You've listened to some great information and education there. Who has a question? Wow. Yes, we have one.
So isn't out-of-home much less targeted than programmatic? So if you have the chance to use programmatic and target the audience you want to reach, why would you go with this one message that goes to 1 million people that you might not want to reach?
Go on, you can have your over that.
So if you want to start with us.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's totally complementary. Depends on what kind of product or service you're in. In our business, the only programmatic message that would make sense is when somebody's in the buying window, which is normally roughly around 3 months. And if you can find the right data signals to find out when people are in those 3 months, programmatic is definitely the best. Still, traditionally, the lower funnel is driven by radio, because that's what really fundamentally drives people to a dealership. When you speak about the top of the funnel, it can become extremely dispersive. Because if you have a programmatic approach, you don't really have a lot of dwell time. I think we sometimes forget that people, when they are on digital, they just don't have any patience. 6 seconds, right, on Facebook. It's great to have a creative challenge to tell a story in 6 seconds, but bloody hell, our brand is more worth than 6 seconds, right? Because we have much more to say. And from that point of view, I think longer formats and triggers out, which I like as a concept, you know, you have to have a trigger when you're still in the top of the funnel. And without a trigger, you will never think about a Volvo, right? You don't wake up, unless you have a baby, but that's the most natural trigger to think about a Volvo. But otherwise, it wouldn't cross your mind. So you need to have those things on.
I think, just if I can add to that slightly, I mean, I think by its very nature, out of home is always one-to-many, right? Unless you've got a media owner who's got ads in bathrooms, you're basically always going to be reaching more than one person at a time. But that doesn't mean that you can't do some level of targeting. There are particular audiences that are very hard to reach in other environments, in digital environments. If you know you can reach them in the real world with a absolutely beautiful out-of-home campaign, you just may want to accept that you want to target them in that environment, in that medium, and you're prepared to accept a level of wastage, a level of also reaching people who are not 100% in your target. And I think once you get over that hurdle of thinking that as long as the audience you're trying to reach are in that time period or in that environment, then why not?
I would also just add, I think they're complementary. There's also a price aspect in here as well, what you're paying for a one-to-one message versus to a one-to-many and how it all works together. That should all flow into an overall strategy. Again, I think we just got this habit of going into silos. Why should I do this and not this and this and not this? It should actually all work together. If you take a consumer-centric approach to marketing, then your storytelling and you're using the different touch points to tell that story, which will all have different prices and all different values to that. So I think they're complementary. I think you can't look at them in silo.
I agree with the complementary aspect. Also, you know, programmatic is such a broad spectrum of transactional possibilities. It's nothing to say that out of home can't be programmatic. It just won't necessarily perform a real-time auction in 300 milliseconds. But it will have automated capabilities. It will have data-driven decisioning on how it's bought. It may have creative decisioning driven by data included in there as well. So, yeah, I think it's too easy to say, oh, why is it competing with programmatic? The term's too broad. It's complementary as part of a mix, but also from a programmatic point of view, it will become part of the out-of-home's future as well, I'm sure, like every other channel we're seeing.
Okay, conscious we have reached the end of our time, so let's have a big round of applause for our panel, Ben, Theo, Cadi and Sven. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.